Long before the oceans drank the world, there was only the land. One land, Kalimdor. To look upon the maps of today is to see a corpse, broken and scattered. But back then, it was whole. It was a garden, but a garden kept by wolves. At the center of the world lay the wound. They called it a well, but a well is a simple thing of stone and water. This was a lake of liquid starlight, the well of eternity. It was the womb of the world's magic, a swirling violet eye, staring up at the cosmos, unblinking. It hummed with a sound you felt in your teeth, a vibration that promised that you could be more than flesh and bone, that you could be a god. Gathered around its shores like moths drunk on nectar were the Highborne, the Quell Dore. In the glorious city of Zin-Azshari, night did not truly exist. How could it? The white marble streets reflected the arcane glow until the air itself shimmered with a feverish heat. It was a paradise built on silence. The silence of the lower castes. The silence of dissent. The silence of a people who believed they had already won the game of history. And at the pinnacle sat Queen Azshara, the light of lights. She did not simply rule this empire. She seduced it. Her vanity was a gravity well, stronger than the earth itself, pulling every eye, every heart, and every drop of magic toward her throne. She believed the well belonged to her. She believed the cosmos loved her. But the Highborne forgot the oldest truth of the arcane. Power is not a possession. It is a beacon. When you light a fire this bright, in the infinite cold of the great dark beyond, you do not just illuminate your kingdom. You announce your location to the predators. They looked deep into the waters, seeking only their own beautiful reflections. They never stopped to ask, what might be looking back? Perfection is a cage. And Queen Azshara was pacing against the bars. To the common elf, the Highborne court was a dream of silk and wine. But to Azshara, it had become stale. She looked upon her subjects and saw only pale imitations of herself. She looked upon her empire and saw a stage too small for her magnificence. She did not want a king. She did not want a consort. She wanted an equal. And from the void, a voice answered. It was not a voice of flesh, but of fire. It whispered of a power that made the well of eternity look like a candle against the sun. It spoke of order. It spoke of a cleansing. The Dark Titan, Sargeras. He did not threaten her. He courted her. And in her catastrophic arrogance, Azshara did not see a destroyer. She saw a suitor. She saw the only being in existence worthy of standing beside her. Her counselor, Lord Xavius, was the first to bend the knee. With eyes replaced by gems of black and red, he saw the world not as it was, but as it could be reshaped. He moved through the palace like a poisonous thought, whispering to the Highborne that their thirst for magic was not an addiction, but a birthright. He began the rituals. He began to thin the veil. But the timeline rebelled. History was supposed to be a straight line, a march toward inevitable tragedy. But suddenly, there were glitches, impossible variables thrown back against the tide of time. Strangers appeared in the wilds of Kalimdor, beings that had no place in this age. There was the wizard Ronin, a human, a race that was nothing but primitive dust in this era, wielding the arcane, with a mastery that baffled the Moonguard. There was Crassus, a mage, who carried himself with the ancient, sorrowful weight of a dragon, yet was trapped in a fragile mortal shell, sickly and desperate. They carried the burden of the future. They knew the ash that was coming. And then there was the creature, the anomaly, Broxigur. To the pristine, violet-skinned elves, he was a monster. A beast, green skin, thick with muscle, scarred by 1,000 wars that hadn't happened yet. He carried an axe carved from wood, yet it felt heavier than iron. He was an orc, a child of a different world entirely, tossed into the cradle of Azeroth's antiquity. While the Highborne discussed philosophy and art in their marble towers, Broxigur stood as a living testament to the brutality of survival. He was not beautiful, he was real. When he looked at the well of eternity, he did not see potential. He saw the enemy. He saw the fel that had destroyed his own people. These three, the wizard, the dragon, and the warrior, were not supposed to be here. They were scars on a painting. But fate, it seemed, required a correction. Down in the lower city, the young druid Malfurion Stormrage felt the shift in the wind. He felt the sickness in the earth before he saw it. His brother Illidan, with his amber eyes destined for greatness, looked toward the palace with envy, mesmerized by the lights. But Malfurion looked at the strangers from tomorrow, and he saw the truth. The Golden Age was over. The anomalies were not the threat, they were the warning. The end of the world did not begin with a roar. It began with a hum, a vibration that started in the bones of the Highborne sorcerers and radiated outward, until the very stones of the palace began to weep condensation. In the inner sanctum, Lord Xavius stood at the precipice of the well. He was no longer merely an elf. The power he channeled had begun to hollow him out, stretching his skin, darkening his spirit. Around him, the greatest magi of the Kaldorei chanted in unison. It was a beautiful, terrible sound. A harmony of absolute arrogance. They were weaving a lattice of pure arcane energy. A bridge across the stars, strong enough to hold the weight of a titan. But the well knew. The waters, usually a calm, reflective violet, began to churn. The surface turned viscous, like oil. The light from within shifted. The cool, intellectual blue of the arcane was strangled by a sickly, pulsating green. The color of bile, the color of entropy. The smell hit them first, not the scent of ozone and rain. That magic usually carried, but the stench of sulfur, burning hair, and rotten meat. It was the smell of the fell. Outside, the citizens of Zin-Azshari looked to the sky. The eternal starlight was gone. Storm clouds, unnatural and bruising, swirled directly above the palace. Lightning, green and jagged, struck the water, boiling it instantly. The lake hissed. It screamed. And then, the bridge was completed. The portal did not open outward. It collapsed inward. A tear in the fabric of reality, bleeding shadow. The Highborne waited, breathless. They straightened their silk robes. They prepared their accolades. They expected the Golden One. They expected Sargeras to step through and lift them into divinity. Instead, they heard the chittering. The first things through were not gods. They were hounds. Massive, skinless beasts with tentacles whipping from their backs, sensing the magic in the air like sharks smelling blood in the water. The fell hunters. They did not pause to admire the architecture. They leaped. The nearest sorcerer didn't even have time to scream before the mana was ripped from his veins. It wasn't a battle. It was a feeding frenzy. The hounds devoured the magic, and then they devoured the flesh. The chanting faltered, replaced by the wet tear of meat and the shattering of bone. Xavius watched, unmoving. He did not recoil. He smiled. Behind the hounds came the soldiers. The Fell Guards, towering giants of red muscle and black iron, wielding axes that glowed with the same hateful green fire. They stepped onto the pristine white marble of the palace floor, and where their hooves landed, the stone blackened and cracked. The Highborne guards, confident in their centuries of training, raised their glaives. But they had trained for duels. They had trained for art. They had not trained for this. The Legion moved with a brutality that defied logic. They swatted the elves aside like insects. There was no parry, no riposte, just the sickening crunch of armor collapsing. Under overwhelming force, the slaughter spilled out of the sanctum and into the opulent halls of the palace. It is important to understand the horror of this moment. The music was still playing in the ballrooms. The nobility were holding crystal goblets of wine, laughing softly, waiting for the queen's announcement. The doors burst open. The green fire did not just burn, it consumed. It clung to the tapestries, the wood, the skin. It burned with a roaring hunger that could not be extinguished by water. The panic was immediate and absolute. The orderly, perfect society of the Kaldorei dissolved in seconds. Elves trampled one another in a desperate stampede to escape the Grand Hall, but the demons blocked the exits. The Fell Guards did not run. They walked. They walked through the crowd, swinging their axes in wide, rhythmic arcs. They were harvesting. And above it all, in the highest tower, Queen Azshara watched. She saw her people burning. She saw the city she had built turning into a charnel house. She saw the blood running down the steps of the palace like a river, and she did not weep. She did not order the guards to save them. She turned to her handmaidens, her face a mask of terrifying calm, and whispered that her guest had arrived. To her, this massacre was not a tragedy. It was house cleaning. It was the necessary removal of the imperfect, to make way for the perfect. The invasion spilled out of the palace gates and into the city proper. The sky rained fire, infernal meteors crashing into the marketplaces, the parks, the homes. From the craters rose the infernals, golems of green rock and fell flame, rising to crush anything that moved. Zin-Azshari, the jewel of the world, was dying. The white marble turned black. The purple sky turned green. The screams of the dying merged into a single deafening note of despair that echoed across the dark waters of the well. Far away in the wild forests, Broxagar, the orc, felt the tremor in the earth. He knew that vibration. He gripped the handle of his axe until his knuckles turned white. He had hoped, against all reason, that he had left this nightmare in the future. But the fell follows. It always follows. The ritual was complete. The door was open. And the world of Azeroth had just become a slaughterhouse. Dawn never came to Zin-Azshari. The sun rose, but it was choked by a ceiling of oily smoke that stretched from horizon to horizon. The city, once a beacon of white light, was now a flickering ember in the dark. The silence returned. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a graveyard. In the shadow of the burning capital, Malfurion Stormrage stood watching the smoke curl into the sky. The naivety of his youth died that night. Beside him, Tyrande Whisperwind prayed to Elune, her voice trembling, but the moon seemed very far away. They realized the terrifying truth. This was not a war of conquest. The Legion did not want their land. They did not want their surrender. They wanted their extinction. The Queen had not been tricked. She had not been captured. She had opened the door. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. The people of Azeroth were not fighting an enemy at the gates. They were fighting the rot from within. But amidst the ashes, something else was kindling. A spark of defiance. Broxagar, the orc out of time, sharpened his axe. He knew that this was not the end. The slaughter in the palace was merely the prologue. The portal was widening. The real army was coming. To survive, the Kaldorei would have to shatter their own world. The wild gods, the ancients who slumbered in the Emerald Dream, would have to be awakened, only to be thrown into the meat grinder. The dragons would have to descend from their mountain peaks, to burn the very land they were sworn to protect. The Golden Age is dead. The Age of Chaos has begun. They say that before the end, there is a moment of clarity. A moment where you see the cliff's edge. This is that moment. And the fall is a long way down.